So, in the month of November, I'm spending time talking to a bunch of really great guys about guy stuff, male issues, things that I think are unique to the experience of men, but that are impacting all of us. Because if you're not a man, you know some, and it's impacting your life too. So, in the lead up to International Men's Day, which is November 19th, and the month of Movember, I want to sort of celebrate men and talk about important things. So today, I'm talking to my friend JP, who I met through a mutual friend, our mutual friend Tanya, and who I've gotten to know over the course of the last year. And I wanted to chat with you about this because I think you have an interesting perspective. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll dive in and chat.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I love this opportunity. I'm excited to talk about it. I am JP. I'm 47 years old, and I currently reside in College Station, Texas. Born and raised Texan. And in my career, I've kind of had a little bit of everything, but most recently, really concentrating on the project management and honestly, project coordinator
Mm-hmm.
positions, and really have tried to find what makes me the most happy in my career, and that's really been the story for the past few years for myself. I am married. We have now been married. It'll be 20 years coming up in a couple of weeks.
Oh,
And
congrats.
we've got two great kids. We've got a 16-year-old and a 9-year-old who definitely keep us on our toes. They're, we've been called the Hot Mess Express more times than I can count, but we're having a lot of fun, and it's been great. It's been a highlight to be able to see them grow up and to have more opportunities to do that. So that's kind of where I've been as far as that goes. And yeah, each day's a new adventure. Every time I wake up, you never know what's going to happen next. So
We
it's a lot of
don't,
fun.
and that's the nature of the world, certainly. And then within our families, it's also true. It's like, what's happening? So
Absolutely.
so talking about one of the things you just said, like that I think is really a good starting point for us. Like you've had this interesting career. You worked in the oil fields. You've done all these different kind of training jobs, and you've worked with salespeople, and but you've sort of found yourself like going, oh, there's this new space I want to be in, right? There's this kind of interesting new space I want to be in. As you move into those spaces, and as you think about that whole career, do you think it's been do you feel like it's been a progressive journey to get to like, hey, I know now what would feel good and be good? Do you think you sort of backed your way into it like some way? And do you think it's been a natural progression? And how has that journey been for you to sort of find the thing that you enjoy doing the most?
It's a good question. I think for me, it's less backing into it. I do think the best analogy, because I do a lot of analogies, the best analogy I can come up with is a sailboat. Um, I really, when I got out of the oil field, the only thing I knew is that I didn't want to be in the oil field anymore because it was very much
Yeah.
my the way I looked at work was just it's just means to an end. It's like whatever the work is, shoveling dirt,
Yeah.
doing oil field work, it's just to get the paycheck because the paycheck's what provides.
Yeah.
Not really considering that there are opportunities that will better align to my own kind
Right.
of talents and needs and happiness.
Yeah.
And so ever since I made that decision, like, hey, I want out of the oil field, I really want to work and kind of see where the wind takes me.
Yeah.
Um, that's been for the past, I don't know, almost 9 years now, 8 9 years now, since getting out of the oil field. That's been the nature of my business. It was I came into a job at entry level, like literally just first, coming in the door, and progressed because of the talents that I demonstrated, and
Hmm.
kind of felt compelled to continue to do those things. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
with training, it was one of those, I just want to help people learn how to do it. By doing that, it kind of shined a light on, well, hey, you really are a pretty good trainer. Maybe we can give you more opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
And those have just strung together to kind of get me where I'm at today. But it starts with there are opportunities to find something that you like to do, and you can actually find a career path that takes you to doing what feels better naturally to you.
Yeah.
And I've been enjoying that part of it because it's almost like I did find, hey, not only am I working and providing for my family, which I'm absolutely doing, I'm also having a lot of fun, and that makes it easier to get up in the mornings. It makes it easier to not feel so bogged down, and honestly, it lets me have a little bit of my own sort of reward in the process of making sure I'm taking care of what's necessary for me and my family.
Yeah. No, I love that because I think that, I think it's really easy to look at I have to snarl when I say it, but it's really easy to look at sort of the bro tech culture and think this is all designed around a certain kind of man. But the truth is, I've done this for 25 years, and I have worked with some amazing guys who sort of fell into, software development because they liked video games, or they fell into marketing because they sold some stuff once and somebody said, you're pretty good at this, or they fell into leading salespeople because they could sell stuff. They sold car stereos and ended up like, oh, I'm going to sell things at this startup, or whatever. And I think I wonder sometimes if men that have been pigeonholed by society to say, hey, you're a blue collar guy, be a blue collar guy, if they don't see a possibility because they don't see themselves in those other realms, right? And when you take those leaps and start to follow your passion a bit, like it'll open space up, right? And that there are opportunities. I don't know. I just was thinking about that as you were talking.
No, I agree. It's funny you mentioned the pigeonholing. That typically is what has traditionally, you see that a lot, at least with my experience here in Texas for sure. But I hear about it a lot across a lot of different men and groups that I hang out with. That you have this sort of, it's almost superficial. It's like, hey, look, I'm a fairly large guy. I'm not going to hide from it. Fairly large guy. I get a lot of, look, you're bearded. You're very large. You obviously should be in the oil field or doing some sort of trade that involves male stuff.
Right.
And I'm like, no, you know what? I'd be happy to be a secretary. I'm
you answer phones, right?
Yeah, exactly. That job that I mentioned a minute ago, that entry level job, that was the first thing. It was selling stuff over the phone.
Yeah.
Coming from an oil field working job where and even that progression, I started out in the field and working with the heat and the dirt and it was, I got so many looks, and this is why it comes to mind. I got so many looks when there was an opening inside in the office area to do paperwork.
Yeah.
I was the first one to apply, and they're like, but like you have been outside and being physical and look at your size. Like,
right.
And I'm like, believe it or not, as a large man, I can also sit down and do work at a
computer. Do things, right?
I could do that, there was a little bit of, but it was that people tend to pigeonhole you. They tend to assume based on whatever criteria that you obviously, you're not suited for this work based on whatever arbitrary reason it is.
Whatever.
To me, it's as long as it all pays the same. Like,
to me, it's all money.
It's
right.
We're here to do a job, make money, do that work. If that work is at a computer, great. If that work is outside, great. It's whatever I feel is going to do the best for me and my family. That's it. And I don't assume that, like, I never look at a role and go like, well, that's women's work. I get that a lot, and I'm like, no. To your point, like trainers, I was the only trainer in the entire ecosystem at this fairly large, I won't say the name company, and it was hard to find male versions of trainers.
Yeah.
It's just that was the nature of it. They're just like, well, that's not something typically we see males or so. For many years, I worked with a variety, large group of women to do what I was doing, and I never looked at it as a male role, female role. It was just I'm good at training. I like to teach.
Yeah.
And so as long as that is the if it's something I can do naturally, I could tell you how many times I just threw here's the content, go.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's the nature of the thing. So back to I was actually bringing up a point, like for me, it's making sure I never dreamed. It was inspiration from a movie called Pulp Fiction, came out in '95. It's old. There was a role which the guy is the problem solver, the wolf.
Yeah.
And they call this guy in to come in and solve problems. I never imagined that in my career, like that could be what I do as a job.
Right.
And over the course of time, assuming that it wasn't, there's no way I could do it. Look at me. I'm a big guy from Texas, worked in the oil field, have a little bit of an accent, that I could fill that role of being the wolf, the guy that solves problems.
Yeah.
I've learned over the past few years, that is exactly what, there's plenty of work to do.
Yeah.
And plenty of problems to solve. I just got to, not assume I can't get it just based on whatever criteria, and look at it as the opportunity it is and take it.
Yeah. I love that. What comes to my mind is that when, as you were talking, I was like, how many times in my career have I looked wrong for the job because I was not a man, right? It's easily walk in a room and they're like, oh, we weren't really looking for a girl to do this job. They might not even say it, but they were sort of like, lady, are you in the right room? Right. And you're like, yeah. I'm the right person, right? But what's fascinating is I wonder, I think there are mutual lessons to be learned there, and I think our own viewpoints sometimes cause us to go like with men and women, is to go the other way away from each other. Women say, "Oh, you don't understand because you've never been the only woman in a room," and then I talked to my friend Gino, who is a black man, and he's like, "Yeah, you've never been the only black guy in a room, right? Or you've never been the only man doing a job that's predominantly female." And I think that there are, filled by women. Like I think that there are interesting things that we could come together and talk about, as groups of people, where instead of isolating, we could have conversations. I was having a conversation at a dinner party a few weeks ago with a guy who tried to go into midwifery and quit because he couldn't, he's like, it's hard to be a midwife if you're a man. And I'm like, yeah, that's a weird job for a dude. That's what I thought. My first thought was like, it's a weird job for a man. And then I thought, well, I mean, if you want to be a midwife and you can get the training and women need to have babies, go ahead, right? Like, that's what you want. Like, I don't have a real problem with it, but it was interesting that my first reaction was like, why would you want that job? Meanwhile, there were probably plenty of men along the way as I was coming up in tech going, why do you want this job? Right? But the money spends the same, right? And I was good at the job. So, yeah, I just think that we have some blocks in our brains around, still these kind of gendered spaces where it's like, oh, a white man would never understand this, but you just described a time when you do, right? So, yeah,
Very true. Yep.
super interesting. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of alongside this. I think that they're in this sort of structure we've created around, if we would call it patriarchy, and I think that's an easy thing to call it. There is I think, a pretty strictly defined gender role for men around being a provider. Like, you must provide. And whether you do that working in the oil fields or working at the computer or whatever, you must provide. That is the job. Even when there is a partnership that says, hey, we're doing this together, I think there's still a lot of pressure on men to provide. And so as a guy who's been, exploring moving into these new roles and finding these roles, how has that pressure shown up for you? Like, and maybe for you specifically, and how you talk about it, how you talk about it with your partner, et cetera. Like, how has that pressure shown up for you?
That's, you know a little bit about my personal story. I think that's a hard question for me to answer, primarily because I was sort of, we kind of had a shift like I mentioned, me and my wife, my partner, have been together for married for 20, together for 21. Since day one, we've had a mutual agreement, like, we are going to work together, make sure that we're taking care of each other.
Yeah.
And that's financially, that's, support, it's, all of the things that are very, you know, true of any relationship. You gotta have to work together, otherwise you're working apart.
Right.
Whatever you want to call it. However, what's different for me around that question, my wife has multiple sclerosis. And so 16 years ago, we got the diagnosis that she was going to be afflicted with this. And it started showing up immediately how that was going to change our dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
She is, unable to work now. She is, classified as disabled. However, we treat that very differently. So there's a sort of like an undue and unexpected pressure. Technically, I have to get out and have to provide because she's unable to.
Right.
That doesn't change it. Like, yes, as far as work goes, yes.
Yeah.
However, she shows up as, lets me work, lets me do this. And then her part of the partnership is to make sure, houses, the kids are, finding, and she does all the money. Like, let's be real, I'm ADHD. I'm horrible with money. If it wasn't for her, we'd long.
Like, I don't know where the money went. Right.
No clue. I have impulse control
Right.
problems. There's so many reasons why, the value that she provides. So I do feel, I feel like I have to go to work.
Yeah.
I have to, and that does show up against me as far as stress goes. Whenever that's in jeopardy,
Yeah.
it's less the money, more the benefits and the things that I need in order to take care of her, to take care of the kids. And I did go through a long period of time trying to be self-employed, looking for work. And that was probably the biggest contributor to my stress and what made me struggle so hard with the mental health aspects of that. It wasn't the pressure to be the provider. It was, I did feel like I'm letting them down to not be able to take care of them in whatever way I needed to, because
Yeah.
that's sort of, they do everything. Their part of the relationship is fine.
Yeah.
I need to make sure that I've got them covered.
Yeah.
But that being said, like I don't feel, one of the things that makes that different for me is that she has always been very supportive of whatever it is I want to do.
Yeah.
If, as long as there's benefits, great. Is there money? Sure. And she's always like, they're not paying you what you're worth every day. It doesn't matter what it
Right.
is, doesn't matter
Yeah.
what job it is.
Yeah.
She's like, you're worth so much more. And then she'll send me links to jobs, and she's like, you'd be great for. It's not that she thinks I'm doing a bad job. It's that
Yeah.
she thinks I'm worth more and
Yeah.
need to be doing what makes me happy. So like if it's every time I've said, hey, I want to go to school, like I want to go finish. I screwed up in my 20s. I have a lot of great stories about parties to tell, but
Excellent.
I didn't get my degree right off. So finishing my degree, hey, I think I'm going to switch to this job.
Yeah.
Right. Like I started mentioning entry level, and I was like, hey, I could be a trainer. Hey, I could be a manager. Hey, this job doesn't even have a title. They just say like, JP, you'd be good for this. She's been there every step of the way saying, look, you got my full support 100%.
Yeah. I love that.
So I don't feel the pressure to provide in that, like, hey, I need to work in order to take care of everything. It's
Yeah.
more, I do feel obligated because she can't do
Yeah.
the
Because of the
traditional
partnership.
labor.
Got it.
Yeah, it's how I can do the traditional work stuff. All of that to say, if I'm being 100% honest, though, I do feel compelled, like now, taking care of her as a caretaker.
Mhm.
I do feel more pressure to work remotely,
Yeah.
which I never, COVID kind of happened and forced us to go remote.
Yeah.
And I never realized just how much I've come to rely on that it gives me the flexibility to be a better caretaker for her and her needs with her conditions. Because I can come in, like knock out a bunch of work. I'm super productive in my office. I'm one of those that like, I love remote work because I can come in and be more productive than ever. I used to hate going to the office. I know people are going to see this and they're like, well, JP, you were so outgoing and so excited at the office.
Me too.
Like, yeah, but would I rather be at home? Yes. And would I rather, because I feel like I get way more done at home than I do in the office. Nothing against the office culture, but
It's a lot.
Between the interruptions, the commuting, the travel, you've got to be on the first floor for a meeting, and then you got 20 seconds to get up to the 9th floor for a meeting. All of that kind of contributes to, like, I actually get way more done because I'm not having to do all of the other parts that come into that part.
Yeah.
But long story short, though, I do feel like now I have an undue pressure for whatever role or whatever we're doing. Less about providing, like the money's fine, whatever.
Yeah.
The money's sort of like, as long as it hits this minimum number, we're fine, right?
Yeah.
Like our budget, this is our budget. If you can hit this budget, I don't care what you're doing. If you're peeling bananas and throwing them at walls, I don't care.
Right.
But that's where is it remote? Because now I feel like I got to work a little bit more remotely, because going back to the office now would be pretty rough on us.
Yeah.
For other reasons, but
that makes total sense. It's interesting as you talk about that and the pressure that is, and like it is like you said, it's not sort of the traditional I am provider, beat my chest gender role, but it's more about the partnership you've had and the circumstances. As I've talked to men about some of these topics, some of kind of like the pressures or these balances, one of the things I shared was that in my life, I have people, women in particular, 2 women that I will name, like my best friend and my sister, who if I simply say, things are a little dark up here, if I simply say that phrase, they are gonna power in and try to help me figure out what's going on to keep me out of the depths of despair, right? All I have to do is indicate. My best friend the other day said, Depression Cat came to visit, and I guess it's a character on some show, and she's like, and I was like, well, what is Depression Cat? Right? She's like, here's Depression Cat, and I was like, okay, now I know that's a clue, right? And as I've talked to some men and I've made that statement, they've said, oh, I don't have anybody I could say that to. And I'm a little like, it hits me in the heart to think that I know that there are lots of people, men and women, but I think a lot of men who, if compelled to tell someone they weren't okay, wouldn't even know who to call. And so I'm curious what you think about that and how you see that.
I'll be honest, I fall in the same bucket, to be real. but at the same time, so like when it comes to if I'm not okay,
Mm-hmm.
I have two bad habits. One, nobody will ever know.
Yeah.
Been this way for me personally. Like I've kind of suppressed showing too much or showing too much about myself or any kind. Like you would never know.
Yeah.
Especially true at work. At work, I'm very. You get this version of JP,
Yeah.
and very, 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 very few people know much more than what I let them know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of exceptions in that there's been a couple of work people. Our
Mhm.
mutual friend Tanya is one of them, where it's sometimes I feel okay to be a little bit more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had that bite me. I don't know how to edit this correctly, but I've had it bite me in the booty. How
Yeah.
about that? Quite a few times, because if I get too comfortable and let somebody know something, even the tiniest little bit,
Yeah.
it usually bites me in the butt. So it's rare.
Yeah.
If something's wrong, the only person I've ever really confided in is honestly my partner and my
Yeah.
wife,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah. I get
But
that.
even then, it's just that she's the only person I feel safe enough to do that with.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned, like with her situation too, like she's dealing with her own challenges, and she's not defined by the MS by any means, but like I
Sure.
feel
Sure.
compelled. I say all that to say I feel bad for saying, hey, I'm not having a good day,
Yeah.
when it could be a day where she's unable to walk, or
Right.
she's unable to function normally because of fatigue.
Yeah.
All these things, so it's hard for me to express that,
Yeah.
and yet she's also my only person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't have anybody else.
Yeah.
And actually that was part of this last weekend. I actually had that moment. I was not doing well
Yeah.
over the weekend, and I finally I said, look, I told her, I said, look, I hate to lay this on you, but just so you're aware, like I'm having trouble. Like I'm not in a good place. I'm feeling very overwhelmed, very stressed, all these things. I may use Depression Cat. I kind of like that.
Apparently,
But
there's a cartoon called Big Mouth, and the Depression Cat is one of the I don't know, but apparently there's a cartoon and it has the character. It's all the feelings have these different characters, and Depression Cat lays on them and doesn't let them get up.
I like that. We watched Inside Out. Like I feel like they helped my
Yeah.
teenager kind of express
Yeah.
her emotions as well. She's like, I
Right.
am this blue person, and I'm like,
I'm on
that's the
blue.
sad one, man.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
Right.
I don't reveal it. Like I hide it, and then the second thing I do, I have a bad habit of. As a man, I do fall into the stereotypical. I don't want to talk to a talking doctor.
Yes.
There's a better, more less Texas way of phrasing that. However, talking to the talking doctor
Yeah.
is something. It's not supported widely in my friend circles for sure. It's one of those things that we just don't talk about. Like so and so's going to talk to a therapist. It's all like, oh yeah, that's a good thing. But when it comes right down to booking the appointment, doing the talking, doing these things, I don't trust the person.
What do you think
So
is
like
going to happen? I
I
guess,
have no idea.
what's the worst case scenario?
I tend to overanalyze what they're telling me, and I'm
Yeah.
suspicious. So the few times, that's not to say I haven't tried. I had talked to a couple of people, especially when I was going through some pretty harsh burnout.
Yeah.
One of those, hey, we provide a service. We will
Yeah.
happily set you up with a doctor. So I talked to that guy for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
At the end of it, I was more giving him therapy than I was receiving therapy,
You were
because
problem
I'm like,
solving.
I was problem solving his problems. But that's my hang up with those kinds of doctors, and yet I don't have anybody to talk to.
Yeah.
And it shows up because I don't want to bother Michelle, yet
Sure.
she's the only human, right? So
Yeah.
I don't have anybody to call. So to your point, like it is a huge challenge for me personally. I don't have anybody to call if the stuff hits the fan,
Yeah.
for full of all the kinds of bad analogies today. But if something happens
Good one.
bad and I'm like, you know what, I'm in an extremely dark place, and I've been there, I don't have anybody to talk to.
Yeah.
And it is something that I wish I felt more comfortable in doing, but
Yeah.
I don't do it. I just don't do it.
It's interesting because excuse me, ma'am, you are not part of this conversation. She thinks she's in this.
I want to help him.
She's in this call. She thinks she's come to this interview. Therapy cat is here. Depression cat, she is not.
Uh,
So I think one thing that has come up in some of my conversations and in some of the data I've been reading is this idea that there is a strong sense among men that if I unpack this with someone, they may say something as simple as, "Wow, you're really screwed up. There's something really wrong with you." And that just the mere idea of that is so fraught with risk and rejection that men are like, not doing it.
I
And
can see that.
I want
I
to,
can see it because it's
yeah,
the rejection for sure is a challenge. I am strangely. What about? I look at it this way. What if they unpack something that I intentionally packed? Right?
right,
Like
right,
I will fully admit I didn't have a bad childhood, but I also don't have a good memory of my childhood. So
right.
at the same time,
Don't
it
want you
probably
trotting
could have
that shit
been
out.
right. Exactly. It's like
Right.
I think it's okay. It's fine.
Let's keep it
I
buried. Keep it
struggle with that.
buried.
It's fine. I'm good right now, right? Like I'm good. So like we don't need to ever worry about I don't even want to tell I married my wife 20 years ago. I will tell you right now, I don't talk about the little bit of gap between ages 17 until the point I met her
You don't have to talk
because
about
there's a
it.
lot of great stories, but you know what? We don't need to talk about it. It's fine. It's
I
fine.
don't want to change her
We're good.
opinion on me, right?
Yeah, like
Yeah,
she knows what she needs to know. She's good.
right.
It's all good. We don't need to. But for me, that is a challenge for me. Is I don't want to. It may come to find out. How do you like? What do I do now? I'm 47. So like, if she's like, hey, it's a talking doctor, and I say she, whoever, if they are like, look, I think you need to deal with this thing from 27 years ago,
Right,
right? Like when I was a teenager, like this is what screwed you up from every moment on.
right.
And then I'm like, I'm 47. So what exactly, like, I'm down to the other side of the hill. So in my mind, like my challenge is I'm like, okay, I'm not real sure I've got enough time to fix 27 years worth of trauma, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I just want to be happy for the next 27
Yeah.
years. So let's not talk about it. I'm good.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. It's like, I
Yeah.
really don't know if they unpack something from 27 years ago, what am I going to do with that?
Yeah.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
feel like I've got time to fix it.
I get it. I get it. And I think at the same time, I think what's interesting, I think exactly what you just said, I think it resonates, right? I know other women who feel that way, but I see it in the men I know who I coach or who I know or who I've worked with who I'm like, well, do you talk about this? They're like, no, no, of course not. Who am I going to tell? Right. And it's like, okay, well, you just told me often. Right. But I also think that I think women are sort of struggling with the idea that men, you don't talk about these things, and sometimes you don't even talk to each other. We'll talk a little bit about male friendship, and then we're sort of like, we don't want to carry any more emotional baggage for you. We don't want to we don't want to have to carry it, and yet we care about you, and so we're pushing in and asking questions and poking, and in our relationships with men, and I'm not talking about you specifically, but just men in general. And I think it's tricky because we're sort of like, you should talk to each other, and men are like, nope. And we're like, okay, now we're out of ideas. So we run up against this wall, but really want to step in and help, right? And so it's this kind of constant, and then we get sort of labeled as impossible to talk to, and we're like, but you don't talk to us. Like, what do you mean we're impossible? you know so I think there's something interesting there, and like I said, I think everybody should have somebody that they can say, whew, it's hard, things are hard in here, right? And even if you don't ask anybody to solve it, just the ability to say it can sometimes, I think that's important. But I don't have all the solutions for how to make it safe, right? I have a hypothesis that it's one of the reasons why I have so many male clients is that they know that I've been successful in my career, but they also know I'm a woman, so that makes it a little easier to unpack if you need to talk about stuff, So I think that shows up a little bit, but it can also be risky, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm going to say this thing in front of this person who's been successful. It's like, yeah, it's okay. I've also failed a lot. I think part of the reason talking about my failure helps is that it releases other people to talk about theirs.
I won't lie, like full transparency, that's how I operate. Like I did have that same challenge when I first started talking to you
Yeah.
a little while, last year over the course of last year, because I was looking for help with trying to unpack, between the job situation and kind of looking for a new job, which is still, even a year later, I'm still stressing out just because there's so many rules and you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. But I came into this conversation with you, sort of recommended to talk to you about and get that coaching, which I think is invaluable. It definitely helped me so much last year.
Yeah.
But I did come in thinking, man, I don't know what I'm going to say. You were already doing the work I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it was hard for me to like, I don't feel, I had a huge imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
you will know. Because I was like, I don't think I should be in the same room with you, let alone trying to get advice from you on trying to be what, you know, I wanted to be you when I grew up. So it's like,
terrible.
How do I have a conversation with that person? Yeah.
So, but for the record, that's a really bad idea.
Kind of, you talked about something I think, you know, for me in my situation is a little weird, but at the same time, I actually, when it comes to who do we talk to, if needed to, like say you need to talk to somebody in New York, I do have, and this is where it's weird for me. I've had female best friends my whole life. Starting in high school, like I still have conversations with her on occasion. You know, we keep in touch since I was a sophomore in high school, and she's pretty much a sister to me. I had a brother, I didn't have a sister, so I don't know if that's part of it, but I don't know if I've ever told you, the best man at my wedding 20 years ago was not a man.
So cool.
My best friend for over what is now pushing somewhere around 30 years almost. We've been close. You know, I am uncle to her children, all of those things. And we have had an interesting dynamic as far as our friendship, because it is, people just assumed we had a romantic, and we were like, no, this is strictly platonic. I know this because she is as much of a male friend to me in that dynamic, right?
Right. Yeah.
We do all the traditional, like we drink beer together, we sit by the fire pit, we do all of the traditional male bonding things, watch sports, talk smack. That is the nature of our relationship. The fact that we're two different genders actually isn't relevant.
Isn't relevant. Yeah.
Isn't relevant. So we got married in probably a pretty conservative Baptist church in Texas, which, you know, tells you everything you need to know. And we actually had to have a pre-meeting to make sure we weren't going to dance. You know, it was footloose.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, no dancing. But nope. Michelle wanted a wedding in a church. I was like, I will go along and get along. We'll do this. It's fine. Whatever. However, I said, fine to the dancing. We don't dance. I said all these things. But I said, look, my best friend is going to be my best man, and she's a she.
Yeah.
Now she'll be, you know, dressed, you know, she's not going to wear a tux. She's not going to cross dress or anything. It's going to be, she's going to have a nice black dress, what go with my black tux, and then that's kind of it. I walked out to the Imperial March from Star Wars. So did she.
I love it.
Right. We could have music. We just couldn't have dancing. So it's fine. Walking out to the Imperial March. But you'd be surprised at how much that is a conversation starter, because there's such an assumption that your best man has to be your best man.
Right.
You can have a female best friend. Well, obviously she's your maid of honor for your wife. I'm like,
no,
that's her team. My team. I'm picking my team.
Standing up for her, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
If we change our minds, she's on my side.
Yes. Yeah. As far as if I needed to call somebody, she would be the first person I would probably call. Yeah. We live very far apart now. Like, I'm in College Station. She's 4 hours away. It's made it a challenge. However, she is the phone call.
That's great.
But it's the best man part that usually throws people off, just because there's that assumption that. So I do have like one single, but it's kind of like I treat her very much like a male friend in the way you describe talking to other men.
Yeah.
Am I going to talk to her about some of the deep stuff? Like, am I going to say, like, I'm having a moment of depression? Honestly, no.
Yeah.
Hers, it's more like, hey, my car broke down. Can you guys bring a truck? I could call her and she would probably show up for that for sure. Right. But does she know, like, well, JP is struggling with a really hard, stressful episode and has caused a pretty strong depression where, you know, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
She's still not going to be the person that calls I call for that.
Right.
Which is a lot of my male friends. That's typically how they talk about it too. It's like, well, you know, we don't talk about that stuff. We talk about the hunting and the fishing and the hobbies.
Exactly.
None of the serious stuff. So that's the nature of my dynamic too. Even though best man was a woman.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The best man ever though.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, I think it's interesting. You know, in talking about this, one of the things that the data says is that men Their friendships are based on activity, right? We play sports together, we play video games together, we hunt, we fish, we go to the bar and watch games, whatever. And unfortunately it kind of ends there. It's sort of right. This is the community, right? And I think unless there's an element maybe in some kind of the old before sort of the deconstruction of religion, there were spaces where men could talk about deeper things, maybe, and in certain kind of community ways there were those things, but in general it's still very much around activity. And when I push about that with guys that I've talked to, there's a lot of like, yeah, that we're not talking about our feelings, or I'm not going to bring anything up. I'm not going to say, hey guys, my right arm's been hurting a bit and I think I maybe have to go to the doctor, right? I'm not going to do any of that. And I go back to what I said earlier. I think that feels really risky. And I think the other thing one thing we've talked about is like, I think there can also be among men, even if you're not friends, but among men, there can be judgment on how you like to spend your time. And if you're an athlete, you think if you're a runner, we should run. If you're a gamer, we should game. And if you're a hunter, we should hunt. And anybody who's doing the other thing, you're like, that's not what men do. And so I wonder what your experience is with that.
Oh, so many. There's been a few instances over the course of my life where it was assumed I would do this and assumed that I would be into this based strictly off whatever reasoning would be involved. I actually see it to this day in a lot of I'll go eat, we'll be out at a restaurant and it's the assumption that I don't want the food spicy based on my skin color. And I'm like, that's horrible. I love spicy food. I grew up on the border. Yeah, like this tastes horrible, but I see that more in the hobbies. I myself, for me to de-stress, it is 90% of the time it's going to be a video game. And usually a strategy game, something that's like, I get lost in it. And I don't think it's totally, to me, it's not totally weird because there used to be like solitaire. My mother-in-law used to play solitaire every morning to kind of get into it, right? And she had the most worn out deck of cards ever because every day she's playing. But she's like, that's how I get my brain going. I do the same thing. Video games to me are stress relief. They are challenging. To me, that's where I get my fun from. And again, being from Texas, this just came up the other, last Wednesday, we went out for a work outing. Mm-hmm. And this is very Texas people. And there's the assumption, well, obviously you hunt, you fish,
hunting, right?
You must love working on your 4-wheel drive truck. and I'm like, I have a Hyundai Tucson, a hybrid, right? But it's that the conversation did come up like, okay, well, what is it assumed that I would be into? And that became a challenge for the other men that were in this group. Wow. They were like, well, if you don't hunt and don't fish, what is it you do? And they started naming off stuff before I could even speak. It was like, well, clearly he's into Dungeons and Dragons. Clearly he's into, dressing up and doing sword play on the weekends with his buddies. And clearly he's written a novel like George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones. And I'm like, I just like video games. That's it. I collect books, right? Whatever it is, it's the assumption that I have to be in, kind of into this sort of stereotypical, well, obviously looking at him, you would expect this. People are shocked. I am a larger man, right? Mm-hmm. I was a high school track sprinter. I love running. I wish my knees loved running as much as I love running. Yeah. They no longer love running. I get emails if I try to run. They're like, no.
Yeah.
Just a gentle reminder from your knees that you're 47. They're just like,
stop it. Right.
But I used to be, I was a 200 meter and 100 meter dash sprinter. Mm-hmm. And people are just shocked. I'm like, I've actually got a medal in hurdles for running and doing so. People, but they don't see that because they're like, how is that physically possible? I'm like, I sat down for a job and that did it right there. I just put all the weight on. But back to your point, what's challenging, and I think men need to really this is something that I would love to kind of read into and more about. You would be surprised at the reaction. Like I mentioned, these are guys they're oil field guys. They're talking to me about these things. They stopped knowing what to do. I
Yeah.
mentioned I was not into whatever. It was I don't do hunting. I love hunting. I love fishing. It's
Yeah.
not what I do for fun because to
Right.
me it's more like it's okay, but
It's not,
I don't
it's not
golf.
going to be your first choice. Like you have a
No, my first
different first choice. Yeah.
exactly. My first I like video games. I like movies. I like going to the movies. I love books. I
Yeah.
like doing all those kinds of trivia games. Like you'd be
Mhm.
surprised. We
Yeah.
never even got to that part of the conversation though, because it was just we don't know what to talk about. Like we're done.
Yeah.
You're
It's so
not you don't
it's so
hunt, you don't fish.
narrow, right?
Yes, it's like oh my bad. We don't know what to talk to you about anymore
Right.
ever because we would never admit publicly that we are into
Right.
video games, Dungeons and Dragons, dressing up, all good stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything like I
Right.
love Renaissance Fair. Who doesn't, right? Like
Right.
beer, dress up as a
People
pirate.
need
What's
a turkey
wrong with
leg
that?
now and then. Exactly.
Yeah, but it's not willing to learn or be curious. I hate to go full,
Yeah.
Ted Lasso here. Best quote ever. It was his reference to Whitman's quote around being curious, not judgmental.
Yeah.
I run into that so often when it comes to my hobbies
Yeah.
because I get that whole nobody asks questions. It's
Yeah.
literally, do you hunt? Do you fish? And I'm like, I like hunting. I like fishing. I don't do it often.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Well, then the conversation's over. We're done.
Now you also
Never
wonder.
once have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also wonder, like in a group of men like that, like Ted Lasso, the part of the proof in Ted Lasso was that there were guys on the team who had other interests that they never told each other about because the party line was we only behave like this. Right? And this is what we talk about. We're not going to ever talk about that this guy knits and this guy does this and this guy does that because that would be weird, and so we're not going to talk about it. And so you wonder in a room full of guys who are like, I'm not going to, that's weird. We don't know what to say. They're like, I do think, but I'm not going to tell anybody.
I hate to take this interview off
Yeah.
topic completely.
Yeah.
However, what you just described, I have a teenage daughter. Have you ever seen the movie Tangled from
Yeah.
Disney?
Yes.
The whole bar scene where the ruffians and thugs there's a whole song and dance about the fact that bruiser knits, killer sews.
Right.
Somebody's got a little puppet show. The
Exactly.
whole shtick was you came in assuming what they do and do not like and not asking questions, and that bar is full of Gunther's into mime, and like I could go through the whole song because my teenager to this day still sings it constantly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the reason why that resonates is because that's
Yeah.
literally look at all these ruffians and thugs and people that look like they're just going to be a horror movie, and it turns out all of them are into something that is not expected.
Yeah.
Baking and sewing and all these things that are not expected of someone who is clearly throwing an axe in the other scene. So
Right. Right.
but when you said that, it's when it's
use
like
your hands for both. You can throw an
exactly.
axe and knit.
But it made me, that's exactly, I was like, I'm totally down for it. If somebody's like, hey, look, I'm really into hunting and fishing, but I also do crochet. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be like,
Awesome.
you make me a hat. Yeah.
You make
Like,
me a hat.
I am interested. Yes. I am open to in whatever it is. But to your point, Ted Lasso, yeah, that's the resonation with that is that, if that's even a word, resonation, but that's what resonates with that is that you had a group who they didn't want to challenge the expectation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as a result, they're like, well, that's not expected of me, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. And it comes out, well, there's no expectation. I think that's for me,
Yeah.
that's the male challenge. If I was to sum it up, like if I could just snap my fingers and make something happen, it probably would be, don't come in with expectations.
Yeah.
If you have no expectations, you'll be surprised at just how much more
Yeah.
interesting and how much more conversations are happening and how much more dynamic
Yeah.
the relationships can be because you come in not judging and actually being curious about
Love that.
what's going on in other worlds, because you never know. People all the time, they don't ever know about me being in a mood or anything. Nobody asks questions. If you just ask a couple of questions, it probably changed the whole dynamic.
No, totally. I mean hell, that's half the battle is asking a question instead of assuming or pontificating, right? Like that's like 100%. So I'll ask you a question to close up.
Yep.
We have a couple minutes.
Yes.
So my closing question for you is, tell me about someone who is a role model who has had an impact on your life, that still resonates kind of through today.
I will only answer this if you promise not to laugh. Like I know I'm sharing this with the broader internet, and that's fine.
I'm ready. I'm serious. Are you ready? I got my serious face on.
Optimus Prime.
Oh, interesting.
So Optimus Prime is a Transformer. He's the leader of the Transformers. People assume all the time. I have Darth Vader. I have a really close second. I'll mention that, but the first one, the one that's like, if first, what would Optimus Prime do? Because as a kid, right? Like I grew up in the 80s, and in 1984 when they started rolling out the cartoon, I was super into the cartoon.
Yeah.
But it was the character of Optimus Prime. It was here's this guy who is overwhelmingly challenging everything around him.
Yeah.
He's dealing with all these things, and yet here is this role model who's like the consummate leader. Like there's never a moment of wondering. He's like the George Washington of this thing, where it's just, he's the leader, and everything he does is what you want to be as a leader. Like the way his troops believe in him. He's super supportive of whatever they're doing. You never see Optimus Prime going around like, look, should you be doing that? Right? Like he never does that. Right. He comes in and he's just like, what you do and who you are contributes to the greater good of the team, and we'll use that in the way that we need to. And over and over and over again, there's a reason why the Transformers franchise has existed since 1984 and went from toys, like the cartoon was made to promote toys, to a huge, 40 years running of content around the Transformers. And it centers, even to this day, there's a movie that just recently came out, I got to take my son to see it, where it's like, here's the origin story of Optimus Prime. And even then, it's Optimus Prime being the leader and being this sort of pinnacle for how to lead or how to run things. So anytime anyone asks me that question, they're like, who's your role model? I always say Optimus Prime, and people think I'm joking, but I'm like, no, but seriously, Optimus Prime.
We write these leadership stories on purpose, right?
Yes.
Like leadership stories in cartoon form, in whatever form, we write them on purpose so that we can teach leadership. And so you picked up the story and ran with it. Right. So that makes total sense.
Yeah. So to me, it's like, if I want to know what should I do as a leader, I immediately go, well, what would Optimus Prime do? And that's been who I've been since I was. So spoiler alert, whenever you should have seen the little sad, to this day, I still can't watch the whole scene. They have a movie of Transformers that came out in like 87, 86, 87. And again, it was like, we have a new line of toys coming out. So we're going to bring this movie in and do a movie around these new characters so that everybody will be, into the new toys. And the first thing to do in the first 20 minutes is kill Optimus Prime.
Oh God. That's not good.
I was like in 5th grade, 6th grade, something like that when that happened. And my mom, she took me and she described it. She's like, she didn't know anything about, she's just nothing about Transformers. Right. I just took him because I have to sit with him, right? However, she noticed, and she mentioned it every time a new Transformer or something came out, she knew that I would be interested.
Right.
Because she looked over in that movie and saw the crushed, down in my, they just killed Optimus Prime. It took a long time for me to get over that one. And like I said, to this day, I'm 47, still can't watch that scene without getting a little emotional. No. But that's because they showed the 20 minutes of the show before he gets there. He comes in and he turns the tide and everything. Because he's that level of leader. And so to me, that's my role model. I
love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
I'm not going to shame on that one. Yeah.
I've no shame in that at all. I love it. I think it's great.
We don't have enough time left on the call for me to explain my close runner-up, which is Darth Vader. That's a complicated role model. A little complicated because I'm not that guy. I don't want to do the bad stuff, but it's like, do I want to run the ship like that guy runs the ship? Yes. So.
Okay. Well, don't destroy humanity. Just be careful.
No, like I said, that's a complicated role model to unpack. So we don't have a call for that.
Totally. Thank you so much for letting me poke around in how you think about the world and how you experience it. I really appreciate it. And I think it's going to be, other people can get some inspiration and some enlightenment from hearing you talk about it openly. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, like I said, giving me the opportunity. Happy to do it because, like I said, it's about asking questions, and if I can inspire a little more conversation and a little more, asking a few more questions and a little more curious and a little less judgmental, whatever I can do to help.
Let's do it. I love it. If you're watching this video, you'll notice there's a little QR code down in the corner. If you'd like to donate to Movember, this is your chance. Movember raises awareness for men's testicular cancer, prostate cancer, and also mental and behavioral health issues that are kind of rampant among male culture. So if you'd like to donate, feel free to donate, and that money will go directly to them. So JP, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.